A catastrophic ocean storm rages through the Atlantic, threatening everything in its path.
I've never seen a storm this large, this vicious.
How can you predict its course?
We were watching the barometer and looking at the weather, and we knew that it was going to get a lot worse.
How can you save those at sea?
We're not going to make it. There's no way we're going to make it.
How will you survive extreme conditions?
Don't do anything people will die. Attempt to rescue even more people can die.
Test your knowledge, strategy, and instincts facing the perfect storm when nature strikes. October 1991. It's fall in New England, a busy time for many seaside communities. Recreational boaters prepare to set sail for warmer climates in the south. At the fishing village of Gloucester, Massachusetts, mariners get to work and hit the high seas. Sword fishing season is at its peak. For many willing to brave the seas, sword fishing can be a lucrative profession. But as this Gloucester memorial to those lost at sea attests, it's also a deadly one.
We live our life right on the edge of danger all the time. I mean, I can't tell you how many close calls of life and death I've had. It kind of gives you a little spook at the beginning, but I'll tell you, we didn't stop hauling the line.
On October 25th, the six-man crew of the Andrea Gale prepare to return to Gloucester. They've been sword fishing for weeks near the Grand Banks, a dangerous maritime area southeast of Nova Scotia, known for abundant swordfish. The Andrea Gales had a good haul, and the men, including 30-year-old Bobby Shatford, are ready to come home. Bobby's sister Mary Ann remembers he was anxious even before the ship left the port.
I knew he was apprehensive about going out. More than one fisherman said to me, well, Mary Ann, no one ever wants to go fishing. You get in the boat, you're uptight, you're anxious. I just think that, you know, people don't eagerly hop on a boat to go out fishing for 30 days, especially my brother, because it really wasn't in his blood. Leaving a safe harbor is always hard for any fisherman.
In the past weeks out at sea, the Andrea Gale crew met with chilly winds, but otherwise calm conditions. But 2 days later, as the Andrea Gale heads west, Captain Billy Tyne radios the Canadian Coast Guard. He says he's facing heavy weather on the horizon. The Andrea Gale is about to collide with a phenomenal North Atlantic Ocean storm of epic proportions.
It was this really warm, calm day, and it was very strange. There was a very weird feel in the air.
Back on the coast, the weather is deceptively clear. The only clues that a tremendous weather system is gathering out at sea are coming in through first-hand reports, radioed in from ships, offshore weather buoys, and satellite imagery. The National Weather Service watches in disbelief. A meteorological monster is taking shape before their very eyes.
So I was one of three forecasters that was making the decisions for the high seas forecast of winds and waves for the western North Atlantic. Our numerical guidance, each subsequent run of the numerical guidance was telling us that this really was going to be a significant event.
From the south, Hurricane Grace is moving up the Atlantic coast. Hurricanes are fueled by moist tropical air. When they hit land, the supply of tropical ocean air is cut off, and they eventually lose their punch. But instead of continuing its course over land, Hurricane Grace skirts the coast, then heads offshore again, building momentum.
Grace was accelerating to the northeast. We now had 40, 50, 60 knots of wind over a very, very large area over the western Atlantic.
From the northwest, a Canadian cold front is pushing toward the east. It's then followed by a high-pressure system. Meanwhile, Off the coast near Sable Island, a low-pressure system stalls and builds. The air rises and condenses, bringing winds, creating rain and stormy conditions, a potential powder keg of unstable air.
When you have very cold air flowing over relatively warm water, and there's such a difference between the air and the water in temperature that you're able to pull moisture right off of the water very, very quickly, you get an overturning of the atmosphere, basically a violent overturning.
And now, Hurricane Grace starts to head directly into these systems. On their own, these three systems can bring very nasty weather, including storms and heavy winds. But if they collide, it could mean disaster. In this mix, which of these three individual weather systems is potentially the most dangerous? Hurricane Grace. It may strengthen as it moves north. The cold front. It's bringing heavy winds. The Sable Island low-pressure system. It's stalled and continues to build. As Hurricane Grace moves north, it's cut off from warm water, therefore losing strength. The Canadian cold front can bring winds, but normally these winds would continue east. But the Sable Island low pressure is stalled and building and may collide with the other moving systems, creating a highly volatile and unpredictable storm. The National Weather Service's worst fears begin to materialize. The cold front moves east, knocking into the Sable Island low pressure. Then, Hurricane Grace collides with the two unstable systems. It's an Armageddon of ocean storms.
This was definitely marine, major impact. One of the worst storms in the Northwest Atlantic, no question about it.
And there's one more surprise. Most New England storms ride the Gulf Stream out deeper into the Atlantic. But this storm is now turning around, moving backwards, what meteorologists call retrograding, and is headed straight for the coast.
Most storms move from southwest to northeast. That's why they're called nor'easters. I've never seen a storm this large, this vicious, and move this far west, and didn't really capture the imagination of a lot of people because it was sunny.
But for the United States Coast Guard, the size of the ocean storm and its unusual path means an immediate call to action.
The National Weather Service was predicting 100-mile-an-hour winds, 60-foot waves. But some of the recreational vessels, they're looking at the blue skies and the sunshine. So they might not have taken the warning seriously. We took it seriously.
On October 29th, a desperate mayday comes in.
Now, best taking on water 50 miles off Cape Ann.
It's from the Satori, a 32-foot sailboat 100 miles south of Nantucket. The three people on board are fearing for their lives.
I mean, they've rolled about 90 degrees. They damaged their rigging. Their life rafts washed over the side. They're drenched with the cold ocean water. Now, hypothermia can kill you because the water is 25 times more efficient at removing body heat than air.
The Coast Guard sends out a Falcon jet and H-3 helicopter to help the Satori. Meanwhile, the Tamaroa, a 205-foot Coast Guard cutter, braves the torrential 35-foot sea swells to assist in the rescue mission.
We were watching the barometer and looking at the weather, and we knew that it was going to get a lot worse.
In less extreme weather, the H-3 helicopter would lower a hoist basket to the boat in peril, load the crew one by one, then haul them up and out of danger. But in this storm, fierce winds are dashing all hopes of a safe air rescue.
There's the risk of wrapping the basket around the rigging of the sailboat. Of course, when that happens, the pilots will immediately cut the cable because they never like being attached to the boat. But once you cut the cable, you're out of the rescue business. It gets worse. There's no second chance.
This means the Tamaroa will have to rescue the crew trapped on the sailboat. The cutter departs Anchorage and transits through the narrow Cape Cod Canal en route to the sailboat.
We were rolling. It was pretty rough out. The wind was blowing at a pretty good rate.
Steering 274, check.
Even with help from the strong waves and currents, it takes the Tamaroa nearly 12 hours to reach the Satori sailboat. But then Commander Brudnicki gets a call that could shut down the entire rescue mission. The captain of the Satori says he will not abandon his ship. You are leading a rescue mission. What's the best option when a captain stubbornly refuses to abandon ship? Evacuate the ship's crew. Get an order from the Coast Guard that demands everyone off. Tow the boat, throw them a line, and haul them back at their own risk. Abandon the operation. Halt the rescue and threaten prosecution for reporting a false mayday. Because the weather system is so bad, the cutter cannot safely tow a boat out of the storm's way. And abandoning the operation, leaving those in peril behind, goes against the Coast Guard's sworn duty to save lives. The commander requests a manifestly unsafe voyage from the Coast Guard's District 1, which mandates an evacuation. At the scene, Commander Brudnicki orders a 21-foot inflatable rescue boat to be lowered to the sea. The three-man Coast Guard team will first deliver cold weather survival suits to the stranded sailboat crew, then help them board the inflatable rescue boat. But the strong currents create major problems.
Sailboat slides off a wave, lands on the bow of the rigid hull inflatable, blows out the forward pontoon, so there's nothing really to protect our boat crew as they head directly into the sea.
The rescue attempt has gone horribly wrong. 3 Coast Guard crew now struggle to stay afloat, and as the storm rapidly approaches, the waves and winds intensify.
The weather was significantly worse than when we put the boat in the water. We're a 205-foot long, 1,600-ton ship, and we're rolling terribly now. Someone could be hurt or killed.
Next, 6 lives are on the line. It all comes down to one man's ability to brave the monstrous waves. October 30th, 1991. A massive storm rages through the Atlantic, churning 35-foot waves and devastating winds. As the storm lurches toward the eastern seaboard, the Coast Guard scrambles to save a sailboat called the Satori. But their inflatable vessel, filled with a 3-man rescue team, collides with a sailboat and begins to sink.
They were knee-deep in seawater, and the engine compartment was flooded. Probably the first time that was presented to me as far as somebody could die.
An H-3 Coast Guard helicopter hovers above. Severe winds cause the helicopter pilot to rule out lowering the hoist basket directly onto the sailboat. The only option is for rescue swimmer Dave Moore to jump into the rolling seas. At 24 years old, this will be his first major rescue.
I was still in the back of the helicopter, and then I heard our pilot say that, okay, well, we'll get ready to perform a rescue using the rescue swimmer. I realized that obviously now I have to pay attention.
He must swim against strong currents to each of the 6 people. First, he heads for the sailboat crew.
It's very easy to lose somebody in a chaotic ocean like that.
You are a rescue swimmer. Where should you direct the sailboat crew? Stay on the sailboat. The boat will serve as a reference. Hold on to the Coast Guard inflatable boat. Keeping the victims together will expedite the rescue. Keep them in the water and away from both boats. They'll be easier to rescue if they're floating alone. In this situation, if the crew stays on the sailboat, the hoist basket may get trapped in the mast. And the Coast Guard inflatable boat is already sinking fast. The best option under these dire circumstances is to tell the sailboat crew to jump into the water, where the rescue swimmer will swim to them and help hoist them up one by one.
I don't want to take on the extra risk of putting 3 more people from the sailboat into the damaged small boat. It's enough for them to handle by themselves.
Wearing a neoprene dry suit, life vest, mask, and a snorkel as his only breathing apparatus, Moore jumps straight into the 35-foot waves and makes his way toward the sailboat crew. Immediately, there's trouble.
You can't see in those kind of seas when you're down in the trough of the swells. You can't see anything except straight up. So You swim until you get to the top of the swell, and you stop, you look around and gain your bearings, and then you continue to swim down the backside of the swell.
Dave Moore tried swimming to them and realized he's not only is he not making progress, he's going in the wrong direction. So the helicopter picked him up and had to bring him in a lot closer.
Finally, Moore reaches the sailboat crew.
And they said, is everybody okay, and who needs to go first? And they just kind of looked at each other, and one of them just raised her hand. So I grab her, turn her around. We swim back towards the direction of the helicopter.
They hoist him up to the helicopter, and you do this one by one until all 3 people are up in the helicopter.
But Moore's work isn't finished just yet.
I get back into the helicopter, I turn around, and the flight mechanic's looking at me, and he's motioning to his ears to come up on the headset. So I put the headset on, and I had forgotten about the Coast Guard guys, but they are completely adrift, and they have no way to get back to their boat. We have 3 more rescues to do there.
Despite the crashing waves and 80-mile-per-hour winds, Dave Moore rescues all 6 people. The H-3 helicopter heads back to Air Station Cape Cod. The Coast Guard cutter also prepares to return to safe harbor before the brunt of the storm catches them.
Well, we complete the rescue mission, and we're headed back into port, thinking we are done for the day.
By mid-afternoon on October 30th, the perfect storm continues to retrograde toward the coast. By this time, most mariners had returned to port or avoided its course further out to sea. But one crew of sword fishermen has yet to be heard from. The men of the Andrea Gail. 2 days ago, Captain Billy Tyne had radioed other boats, including Richard Haworth, former captain of the Andrea Gail.
I had a channel set up with Billy in the beginning when we first went out. I talked to him a little bit on a single sideband, but then I never got him again. He had gone further east, so I couldn't pick him up.
Billy Tyne had told fellow mariners that he needed to get back to Gloucester fast before his several thousand pounds of swordfish spoiled. So he plotted his quickest route home. The Andrea Gail would skirt dangerously close to Sable Island, a shallow area known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. He had no idea Sable Island would also be ground zero for this catastrophic storm.
In the area where the Andrea Gail was, conditions deteriorated very, very rapidly.
One witness to these drastically changing conditions is a Canadian weather buoy. Weather buoys measure wind speed, wave height, sea surface temperatures, and wave direction, then send the data by satellite to the National Weather Service.
We also get the direction of the swell, how much of that wave is swell, and the period, how fast they're coming at us. So the longer the period has an indication to us about energy and translation speeds, etc. So we take all this information, digest it, put it into the models, and helps give us a reasonably accurate forecast.
One buoy, just 70 miles east of Sable Island, sends data that shows a sudden and very violent shift in the sea. It paints a grim picture of what the Andrea Gail may have encountered.
The peak waves, the highest waves recorded by one buoy in particular, went from about 11 feet to 50 feet in a matter of just a couple of hours.
The last time anyone heard from the Andrea Gail was around 6 in the evening on Monday, October 28th. Then, absolute silence. But if the Andrea Gail's in trouble, why no Mayday?
And I called the Coast Guard. There was no communication with the Andrea Gail, and they were trying to just see if they were okay, that they were going to go out and search for them.
Even if the Andrea Gail lost its antenna, there's an emergency communication device on board called the Emergency Position Indicating Radio Beacon, or EPIRB. When a ship sinks, these early generation devices require the captain to manually turn the EPIRB to the on position, which immediately sends out a distress signal. But so far, there's no EPIRB call from the Andrea Gail.
And they were just hoping and praying that They lost all their radios and everything during the storm, but they were okay.
Coming up, a rescue helicopter runs out of fuel, forcing the crew to make a drastic decision to crash land into the ocean. October 30th, 1991. A never-before-seen weather phenomenon roars through the western North Atlantic Ocean. It's the perfect storm, 5 times the size of the devastating Hurricane Andrew, whipping the sea into a frenzy of 80-mile-per-hour winds and towering 6-story tall waves. The United States Coast Guard responds to a flurry of maydays. One call, however, from a stranded sailboat is more than 250 miles off the Long Island coast, beyond the range of their H-3 helicopters.
Most people don't drown, they die from exposure.
The Coast Guard immediately contacts the Air National Guard to help an anchored sailboat and its frightened captain. The Air National Guard specializes in military rescues, but in times of natural disasters, they come to the aid of civilians in distress. Because of the distance, they dispatch an H-60 helicopter along with a C-130 tanker plane. The C-130 can refuel the H-60 helicopter mid-air, allowing for long-distance flights. Graham Bouchard is the H-60 co-pilot.
You have an 80-foot hose that comes out either wingtip of the C-130, left or right side, and it has a funnel-shaped basket on the end of it that we plug the air refueling probe that you see on the front of the helicopter into that basket. We take gas when we're flying.
Also on board is pilot Dave Ruvola, flight engineer Jim Mioli, and 2 highly trained pararescue jumpers, Rick Smith and John Spillane.
Pararescue jumpers, they're the manly men of the Air Force.
On the way to the Japanese sailboat in distress, the C-130 refuels the H-60 helicopter twice. In just over an hour, they reach the sailboat. Already it's growing dark. Conditions for a safe rescue are becoming more dangerous by the minute.
We had our night vision goggles on. They work by magnifying existing light, and if there's not a lot of existing light to magnify, they don't work very well.
You are the Air National Guard helicopter pilot flying in these conditions. What's the best way to conduct a night ocean rescue? Proceed quickly. You have limited fuel and the storm could get worse. Wait for help. Call for additional helicopters to provide high-intensity spotlights. Return later. Note the location and return at first light. With these storm conditions, proceeding with the rescue will endanger both the parajumper and the individual. Even if you wait for additional spotlights, it will be easy to lose sight of the parajumper in the rolling waves. Although the individual is scared, the boat is anchored and not sinking, so the crew decides to return in the morning.
That turned out to be a pretty good decision because he was picked up the following day by a Turkish freighter. We air refueled a 3rd time and started pressing home.
The Air National Guard H-60 and C-130 begin their flight back to the coast. Night is falling fast and headwinds are increasing, and they have no idea they're headed directly into the jaws of the storm. For flight engineer Jim Mioli, who's in the back of the helicopter, the rough ride's just beginning.
We were literally hanging on to the straps in the helicopter and getting bounced off the ceiling while trying to scan on night vision goggles, and it was really tough.
And I've been flying in nasty weather before, but I've never seen weather like this. It caught us by surprise, and our ground speed was showing about 30 knots. Well, we're flying along at 120 knots, and we've only got 30 knots of ground speed. We got a 90-knot headwind that we're flying into.
What's worse, the helicopter is quickly running out of fuel. In 90-knot winds, plugging the fuel probe into the H-60's tank is like threading a needle in a wind tunnel.
Well, that hose was all over the sky.
Desperate, Co-pilot Bouchard radios the C-130 tanker to seek a higher altitude, where they'll attempt to refuel above the worst of the storm.
We were at about anywhere from 500 to 1,000 feet trying to air refuel. Winds at this point in the evening were over 100 knots, so that's well over 100 miles an hour.
That was kind of harrowing in itself because now we went into the clouds, lost sight of the tanker, lost an engine. They had to break off from us, and by that time our fuel level lights were flashing.
It becomes apparent that we're not going to make it. There's no way we're going to make
it. You are the pilot, and the helicopter's about to run out of fuel. What should you do? Auto rotation. Hover above the sea, cut the engine, and glide down. Controlled ditch. Ride the helicopter into the sea. Total evacuation. Order everyone to jump from the helicopter immediately. Auto rotations over violent waves will be nearly impossible. A total evacuation can jeopardize the crew. They may be injured when the helicopter hits the water. As the pilot, the safest option is a controlled ditch. Lower the helicopter, order the crew to jump, then steer the helicopter away from them.
The whole theory there is that, you know, the people that get out of the helicopter first, they, you know, only one guy's putting himself at high risk.
Arm the floats!
With only 10 minutes before impact, the crew rushes to prepare for the critical hit. Co-pilot Bouchard sends out an urgent mayday.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. Coast Guard cutter Tamaroa. You can copy our last position. We have 2 minutes to splat.
The Coast Guard cutter Tamaroa picks up the call and tells Bouchard they're coming to get them. But already, it's too late.
That's when number 1 engine flamed out due to fuel starvation. So we didn't even have enough gas to go 12 miles. Negative, negative, negative. Given my lat long, we're ditching right here.
With the moment of crisis just minutes away, parajumpers John Spillane and Rick Smith lean out of the helicopter, trying to estimate the size of the massive waves in the pitch dark. In the back of the helicopter, flight engineer Jim Mioli wrestles to prepare the life raft.
Well, I pushed a raft out, and the waves and swells were like this, moving underneath us. And when I pushed it out, the raft fell into this, I call it the abyss, this big black trough, and it inflated, and I was excited about that, but then it just blew away. So I was like, oh man, that sucks. And then I just sat back down on the floor of the helicopter and just said, you know, reserve myself, I'm going in with the helicopter.
Pilot Dave Ruvola shouts the final command to jump, straight into the churning abyss.
We're going down! Egress, egress, egress! Out, now!
Stood in the doorway. Procedure is flip your goggles up so they don't poke your eyes out when you hit the water. Couldn't see a damn thing. Turned around, the PJs were in the door behind me. Turned around again, PJs were gone. It's my turn to jump, can't see anything. Then I was able to see the wave tops. Timed my jump into one of the big ones.
3 of the 5-man crew have jumped. Now, pilot Dave Ruvola and flight engineer Jim Mioli hang on as the helicopter careens toward the night sea. Within seconds, the helicopter crashes into the sea, violently jarring both men.
And I was in the back on the floor, unrestrained, and it felt like someone was pushing my head and my whole body into the floor while we're getting bounced around. And then once that all stopped, the waves came in, flushed me out.
Now, each man surfaces to find himself awash in the battering waves and knife-like winds. It will take everything they've got to survive this night in hell.
You can actually hear the big ones coming. To see the power of Mother Nature, it's a very humbling experience, let me tell you.
The waves would come and just beat the crap out of you, and then when you come up, you puke it all up, and then you had to kind of put your head downwind because it was like someone had a fire hose in your face, and the water is just blowing past you like that.
Co-pilot Graham Bouchard spots what might be the crew's only hope.
I saw the life raft, went swimming for the life raft. That blew away. There was no way I was going to catch that. I swam like Mark Spitz, but I wasn't going to make it. It just blew away.
It's a 5-man crew, but so far, only 4 have surfaced.
We were still missing Rick.
Rick Smith is a parajumper, one of the most highly trained members of the Air National Guard. He was the first to jump and may have sustained injuries from the fall.
You were out there in the middle of the ocean. You can literally put your hand in front of your face and not even see it.
With the pounding waves, brutal winds, and pitch-black darkness, there's yet an even greater threat. The sea temperature is only 55 degrees. The men may have only 5 hours to survive before hypothermia kills them. For flight engineer Jim Mioli, it could be sooner than that.
One of my mistakes was I had run out to the helicopter and I had my anti-exposure suit. I didn't put it on. My body core temp went down to about 90 degrees.
What's the best way to fight hypothermia? Curl up. Conserve body heat by huddling your limbs close together. Keep moving. Maintain blood circulation by swimming. Float on your back. The less body surface that's underwater, the better. In cold water, movement can actually drain your body of heat, and floating on your back will spread out your body surface, allowing more heat to dissipate. The best thing you can do to survive is to curl up, keeping your head out of the water and your limbs as close to your body as possible. Pilot Dave Ruvola and parajumper John Spillane stay close to Jim Mioli. Co-pilot Graham Bouchard, however, is out on his own.
I started swimming in that direction, and it was very exhausting. My body temperature's dropping because the water's so cold. I'm going to exhaust myself and drop my body temperature even further, so I'm just going to stay right here, stay put, and see what happens.
Next, the Coast Guard cutter must battle the winds and breaking waves to rescue the downed helicopter crew. The perfect storm, nearly 1,500 square miles in size, rages through the North Atlantic off the coast of New England. An Air National Guard helicopter rescue team has run out of fuel and is forced to crash their 860 helicopter into massive 8-story waves.
We're going down.
The United States Coast Guard cutter Tamaroa was on its way back to port from a nearly disastrous rescue mission with the Satori sailboat. But they can't ignore this call for help.
The Air National Guard, these people rescue people just like we do. Put all 4 engines on the line, we come up to full speed and we start racing to the scene. Well, racing to the scene would be a relative term because in these weather conditions, we're only making 3 miles per hour. The average speed for walking is 4 miles per hour.
At that rate, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter will take at minimum 4 hours to arrive. For Jim Mioli, who's already showing signs of hypothermia, it may be too late.
I was, not semi-conscious, but incoherent from the hypothermia.
90 minutes after the crash, a Falcon jet from Cape Cod spots the downed crew's strobe lights in the pitch-black night. The Falcon circles the men while an H-3 helicopter hovers overhead. Co-pilot Graham Bouchard, who's separated from the others, watches the rescue attempt from the rolling waves.
The Coast Guard helicopter tried to pick up the other guys, H-3. They tried for 45 minutes. And they weren't able to do it.
The winds are too severe for a helicopter rescue. Low on fuel, the H-3 returns to the Coast Guard base while the Falcon continues to circle the stranded men. Their only hope is the Tamaroa, but the storm's catastrophic wind and waves are pummeling the formidable 205-foot cutter.
We're literally going up like one mountain and you're coming down on the mountain on the other side. The rudder and propeller are coming out of the water. It makes it very difficult to steer when you don't have a rudder.
Finally, After 4 hours of struggling to stay afloat and alive, the crew spots hope on the horizon.
As it got closer, you realized it was a Coast Guard cutter. Coast Guard cutter Tamaroa. She was beautiful. The undeniable white paint screen with the big orange stripe on the bow, and she's trying to maneuver towards me. And I just couldn't believe what they were doing with this vessel.
But now, Coast Guard Commander Brudnicki faces a major dilemma: how to rescue these men without endangering the lives of his own crew.
Don't do anything, people will die. Attempt to rescue, even more people can die. So this was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever had to make.
Without hesitation, 12 men volunteered to put their own lives on the line. They'll use a cargo net to try to save the downed helicopter crew. But this means they'll have to be outside, exposed on deck. One monstrous wave could sweep them all out to sea. You are the cutter commander in these severe storm conditions. How should your men go out on deck? Tethered to the railing, secure them with a rope. Harnessed to a partner. If one slips, the other one will catch him. Keep loose. They need to be free to maneuver. In this daring rescue mission, the men will be moving around, ducking waves and carrying the nets. Tethering them to the railing or harnessing them to each other will inhibit them and even entangle them. Though it's risky, the best option is to keep them loose and untied.
And our rescue team couldn't even walk out to the bow. I mean, they're practically crawling on their hands and knees.
Graham Bouchard watches as the cutter rolls closer.
The guys on the ship are yelling.
Grab the net, grab the net.
I have my exposure hood on. I can't hear what they're yelling. So I tore the exposure hood off, and they were yelling, swim. The next word was mother. The next word had to do with fornication, and the last word was swim. And that's one of the things that's going to stick in my head forever. I just couldn't believe these kids up there trying to do whatever they could to get me.
The ship rolling so bad, it ended up really more of snagging the person in the net, kind of like hauling a fish up in a net up on the deck. And when we brought the first person up, it turns out it's Graham Bouchard, the co-pilot.
How about a blanket for him? Got a blanket for him?
We got one coming.
And they just flopped me on the deck. Now I remember Bill Muller talking to me. You all right? You all right? And he said, you vomited, which was happening all night long. But he said the first thing he asked was somebody call my family, tell them I'm all right. And I could hear it over the ship's intercom or the radios that they were carrying. Survivor recovered, survivor recovered. You could hear the kids cheering. That'll stick with me a long time.
Bouchard's miraculous rescue motivates the Tamaroa crew to do whatever it takes to save the other downed Air National Guardsmen. But Jim Mioli, who's not wearing his survival suit, is in the throes of severe hypothermia.
Jim was actually going in and out of consciousness. He was in bad shape. His body temperature was down to about 88 degrees.
Next, will this rescue mission turn into a death sentence? The perfect storm is ripping through the North Atlantic, threatening nearly every vessel in its path. 2 a.m., October 31st. The Coast Guard has been making a desperate attempt to save 5 Air National Guardsmen from a disastrous helicopter crash. The Tamaroa, a Coast Guard cutter, struggles to pick up the men with cargo nets. But the massive waves are tossing the ship around like a toy.
We're literally a 1,600-ton cork bobbing in the ocean.
By the time the boat got close enough to us to what we could tell what it was, we were in the bottom of a trough, and there was a wall of water about 50 feet high, and then there's this giant ship on top of that. So we're looking up at it like this. I'm like, holy cow, what are we going to do?
Finally, the Tamaroa's cargo net blows within reach for the 3 Air National Guard crewmen.
We grabbed onto the net, and then a wave came, and John Spillane was able to hang on. I fell off, and I'm pretty sure I yanked Dave Rivola with me because I was tied off to him.
John Spillane is safe, though he's suffering from severe internal injuries. Dave Rivola and Jim Mioli, however, are headed straight for disaster.
Myself and Dave, we went along the side of the ship, and then the ship was on a down part of the swell. So we went underneath it in the back. Dave's looking at the propeller, thinking, oh my God, we're gonna shoot up. I'm looking at the bottom of the ship, which is right here. I'm thinking, oh, this is it. You know, we're gonna get smashed.
Immediately, the Coast Guard crew cuts the ship's engine and stops the propellers just in time. Dave Rivola and Jim Mioli have miraculously surfaced on the other side of the ship. The Tamaroa crew races to throw the nets down to them. This might be their last chance. Mioli's already losing consciousness.
Dave said that he was in my face. Dave, come on, this is it, this is the last thing. He's the one who got me ready for grabbing onto the rope, and they threw the rope over and we grabbed onto it and kind of entangled myself in there, and then they yanked us up.
On board, medics quickly tend to Mioli's hypothermia.
What they do is they take these baked potatoes that are warm and they stick them in your groin and in your armpits, and then they wrap you in this big blanket. And then they stuff me in a bunk.
The cutter crew has fought extreme conditions, risking their own lives to save 4 stranded men.
We've never met them. We don't know who they are. But you have this close bond with them because they go out in conditions like this to rescue other people.
But one member of the Air National Guard crew is still missing.
We had everyone but Rick Smith. Rick was a pararescue jumper. They have the right skill. Rick was one of the best. So we fully expected to find him.
But after a grueling search covering 33,000 square miles, the rescue mission is called off.
It was hard, though, because you come back and you meet your family members, and Rick's not there to meet his.
It was very difficult, very difficult. The hardest thing I ever did was telling my children that their father wasn't coming home.
On October 31st, the storm's fury heads towards land, now affecting the entire eastern coast from Maine to Florida. But weather forecasters predict that Massachusetts, including Gloucester, will be hardest hit.
I remember having a little bit of a feeling of helplessness.
In this storm, what's the biggest threat to coastal towns? The wind. Downed power lines and water are a lethal combination. The rain. The severe rainfall could lead to flash flood conditions. The tide. A sudden storm surge could sweep people and property offshore. In hurricane-level storms, winds will blow down lines, but power companies typically shut down power to prevent the threat of electrocution. And though the rainfall is severe, it might be short-lived. The biggest onshore threat in a coastal storm are the tides, which can suddenly rise into a storm surge, flooding the area and sweeping people and property out to sea. Massachusetts is hardest hit. Hundreds evacuate, just in time before local roads are damaged. Coastal homes are swept into the sea while winds rip down power lines. The waves batter and destroy boardwalks and seawalls.
Towns were isolated by the storm surge and the waves crashing on shore. People had to be evacuated. Rescues were made.
The roads were impassable. There were houses with the walls completely blown out. Furniture was everywhere strewn.
Several Massachusetts counties are declared federal disaster areas.
We were just amazed. We were just stunned by the amount of damage that the storm had done.
Then, on November 2nd, the storm heads north toward Nova Scotia, where it finally dies as it reaches the coast of Newfoundland. The storm has passed, but the tragedy of the missing Andrea Gail and her crew still remains.
There was a number of small boats that swordfish on the Grand Banks. Most of the boats were too small to be there, not just the Andrea Gail. When the weather's bad, they're all too small.
A weather buoy 70 miles east of Sable Island, close to the Andrea Gail's last contact, may provide some insight. A Coast Guard report reveals that at 7 p.m., an hour after Captain Billy Tyne last radioed fellow mariners, the buoy picked up gale force winds of up to 104 miles an hour, kicking up waves to unexpected heights.
We know that 60 miles west of the Andrea Gail, its last known position, that seas, wave heights, basically rose 30 feet in a matter of 3 hours.
What's worse, the waves hit suddenly. In this shallow area surrounding Sable Island and the Grand Banks, the sandy banks caused the waves to trip and break, relentlessly pummeling anything in their path. The Andrea Gail may never have had a chance.
I think that, the boat was just in a bad place at the wrong time. And it just got overpowered by the seas, took too much water on deck, and listed it over and just couldn't recover.
Although the fishing boat was doomed, the crew may still have had a chance. Like most vessels of the time, they had on board a battery-powered device called an EPIRB, short for Emergency Positioning Indicating Radio Beacon. If a boat sinks and the EPIRB is turned on, it can send out a distress signal with the boat's location. Unfortunately, for the crew of the Andrea Gail, the EPIRB wasn't turned on.
If the boat capsizes or goes down, the EPIRB deploys, it starts to transmit. We know there's a problem. The EPIRBs are registered to that boat.
The Andrea Gail did have a manually controlled EPIRB on board, so why didn't the Coast Guard receive any distress signals? On November 6th, the answer washes up on Sable Island, the area where the storm first passed through.
But the day that they found the EPIRB, that was kind of unsettling because it was on the off position.
The fact that the EPIRB was working but was not turned to the on position may be grim proof of the unexpected fury of this monstrous weather system. The Andrea Gail crew likely had no idea that they were about to collide with a gigantic and vicious storm. Their story is a stoic reminder that the wrath of the sea is sometimes impossible to escape.
I think of him every day. I walk down that boulevard and I think this is a memorial to my brother and to many people that I know. And before, I think I kind of took it for granted, the meaning of the fisherman's statue and the fisherman's memorial. But now I'll never take it for granted.
In the end, the perfect storm of 1991 cost $208 million in property damage and took 12 lives, including the men of the Andrea Gail and parajumper Rick Smith, who was aboard the Air National Guard H-60 helicopter that crashed into the sea. It's a storm that will be remembered as one of coastal New England's most bizarre and destructive weather phenomenons ever recorded. The strange collision of three weather systems, Hurricane Grace from the south, the Canadian cold front from the west, and the low-pressure system off Sable Island, creating a mega ocean storm of stunning proportions, whipping the sea into a frenzy of 100-foot waves and winds of nearly 120 miles an hour. For the forecasters and rescuers whose survival instincts were challenged and who had to make critical, life-and-death decisions, the perfect storm is a warning that nature can be unpredictable and unmerciful. A An earthquake slams into your city.
It looked like a small nuclear device had been set off.
It's terrible. There's a lot of people under there. It's pinned.
What do?
You wake up and you think, this didn't really happen.
People, move away, please!
They're closing all the bridges. You can't get home. You're stuck here.
Where do you go?
You're inside a building that's already been crushed and collapsed in half, and there's still more that could come down.
How do you survive?
Everybody was running toward us, screaming, get off the bridge, get off the bridge, get off the bridge.
Test your knowledge, strategy, and instincts during the Loma Prieta earthquake, when nature strikes. October 17, 1989. San Francisco, California. It's a hot and humid Tuesday afternoon. About 62,000 baseball fans pack Candlestick Park for the third game of the World Series.
The mood in the stands was so high. Like, everybody in the stands was rooting and happy and cheering.
5 p.m. 59 miles south. Deep under the Santa Cruz Mountains, pressure along the infamous San Andreas Fault builds. 5:04. The fault ruptures. Starting at a single point, the break tears along the fault plane at more than 5,000 miles per hour. Releasing enough force to lift the mountains, the shock waves spread out in a deadly ripple. Crashing into Santa Cruz, Watsonville, and shooting up the peninsula towards San Francisco.
First pitch in about 12 minutes from right now. Let's go back out to Candlestick.
Whoa, we come. Whoa, we're having a tremendous take.
Oh my God, we're having an earthquake. Wait a minute. Hold on. Can you feel that? 911 emergency. Humongous earthquake.
For 15 seconds, the ground rolls as the 7.1 magnitude earthquake rips through the San Francisco Bay Area.
What about the Bay Bridge? What's wrong with it? Get out of the building now. Get everybody out of the building. Somebody's stuck in the elevator. Yeah, guys, we suffered a major earthquake. We just had a major earthquake. We had damage. People are hurt. Can you go door to door?
It was just this roar of sound, and as our eyes went back down, we could see the seats and the stadium moving almost independently of each other. And then as we got to the field level, Will Clark was walking across the first baseline, and his knees just buckled and he fell from the rolling of the ground.
The stadium escapes with only minor damage, but other areas are hit hard.
Preliminary location 37.0 north, 122.0 west.
In downtown Santa Cruz, just 10 miles from the earthquake's epicenter, buildings are reduced to rubble. In Oakland, part of the double-decker Cypress Street freeway crumbles.
That is completely collapsed. That's the upper section collapsing into the lower section of the Cypress.
Tons of concrete and steel crush motorists.
I just heard that something happened to the Bay Bridge. I heard that too, but I can't confirm it.
A 50-foot section of the towering San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge smashes onto the lower deck. And on the edge of the San Francisco Bay, houses in the Marina District collapse.
Okay, ma'am, I need you to calm down. How many people are in the building?
Fires now rage.
The fire department is not going to be there immediately.
It seemed like every block had a building collapsed or partially collapsed on it.
Go home and secure your residence. Shut off the gas, shut off electricity, store water, prepare for aftershocks, prepare for 3 days of no services. You got 90 minutes of light left. You better make use of your time.
At Station 38, the Marina District's command center, Assistant Fire Chief Dennis Callahan implements the Disaster Operations Plan. He must send firefighters and resources to the worst hit areas. But where are they? Before Dennis can respond, he needs the big picture.
I have to evaluate the situation, the resources, and the staff. We had to know where we were going to send them and get them out there as quickly as we could.
You're a fire chief. What's the quickest way to assess how much damage has been done to the city? Drive. You can talk to rescue workers and assess their needs. Climb the roof of a tall building. It will give you an immediate view. Fly in a helicopter. You can cover a lot of distance quickly. A drive through the city will give you an accurate first-hand assessment of the situation, but many of the roads are blocked by debris and broken water pipes. It will take too much time. Climb onto the roof of a tall building, and the Marina District is easily visible, but other areas are hidden by hills. Fly. A helicopter's the best way to get a quick and detailed visual of the disaster area.
Well, the helicopter gives you the largest overview. In the case of San Francisco, we're talking about a city that's only 49 square miles.
The San Francisco Fire Department arranges to use KPIX-TV Chopper 5. A trip over the city confirms the Marina District has the greatest amount of damage. Entire buildings are either fully or partially collapsed. A major fire burns on the corner of Beach and Divisadero streets.
Never seen that much destruction in my career in one location like that.
Yeah, let's go, everybody out!
Firefighter Richard Allen arrives at the main fire on Beach Street. The tightly packed wooden buildings are the perfect fuel. In 15 minutes, the fire consumes 3 floors and spreads to neighboring buildings. The flames look unstoppable.
The main concern at that point was that it would just leapfrog from one building to another and eventually take a square block and then a couple of blocks.
Worse yet, the earthquake has ruptured the auxiliary water supply system. What little water there is not enough to stop the spread of the fire.
I was told at that time that there was no water available. They didn't know where they were going to get water. The hydrants were out.
Firefighters fear they will have to leave the Marina District to burn.
There was also some talk of the pulling back to Lombard Street and possibly making a stand at that point, which meant they would have pretty much given up the whole Marina District.
Rescue workers hear a woman call from a collapsed building. The 3-story structure is little more than a 12-foot pile of wood and plaster. It may take hours to free her.
She was talking, she was calling out, somebody help me, please don't leave me.
A trained paramedic, Richard volunteers to crawl into the pancake structure with firefighter Jerry Shannon. If the building catches fire, they will burn to death.
And all we were trying to do was tell her to keep talking so we could at least head in that direction. We were trying to follow her voice and find out where she was.
The Marina District sustained the city's worst damage. The culprit, the massive 800-mile San Andreas Fault. Across the bay, the 55-mile Hayward Fault poses an additional threat.
These are the principal or the most dangerous faults in the area.
These master faults mark the boundary between the Pacific Ocean Plate and the North American Continental Plate. Like 2 giant rafts, the plates slide past each other. When the movement is stopped, pressure builds.
They kind of get hung up and they stop, and while they're hung up, the plate's still moving, so there's stresses that build up at the boundary. And eventually those stresses exceed the strength of the area, and they pop, and that pop is the earthquake.
These 2 major faults make California one of the most seismically active regions in the world.
The red dots show the several 100,000 earthquakes that have occurred in California since about 1980.
Most are little more than rumbles, 1 or 2 magnitude shakes. But at 7.1, the Loma Prieta earthquake is a major rupture.
As the fault moves, and it moves fairly rapidly, it sends out waves, sound waves and shear waves, away from the fault as it moves, and that's experienced as the shaking from the earthquake.
In the city of Oakland, the ground beneath the double-decker Cypress Street Freeway shakes. In a moment of unimaginable horror, the concrete pillars between the decks fail. The top deck slams onto the deck below. Oakland firefighter Lieutenant Mark Hoffman and his crew from Engine Company 1 are the first firefighters on the scene.
When my driver stopped, we looked at each other and it was just, oh my God. Took a moment to process what we were seeing. It looked like a small nuclear device had been set off.
It was actually overwhelming. From as far as the eye can see, you could see collapse. The top of the structure collapsed into the lower portion of the structure. The cars were crushed like an aluminum can would be crushed.
Everywhere, there's chaos. Local residents try and help the wounded. The injured need aid desperately. Lieutenant Hoffman sets up a triage center. He then climbs up the outside of the support columns and enters the gap between the decks.
I really had to go through a kind of a gut check and do I really want to do this?
In the 4-foot-high crawl space, cars burn. The air is thick with smoke. Mark can smell gasoline from ruptured fuel tanks.
We can't do mass pants. You got to get the patients down first.
I'd never really seen this before. The suspensions just completely went to the ground. The floorboards were right against the roadbed and the wheels were just tucked up.
Lieutenant Hoffman searches each vehicle for signs of life. At first, he finds only death. Then on the edge of the freeway, he sees a car pinned under a concrete slab. In the wreckage, 2 children are in need of help.
Well, the boy was delirious. The girl was also at a high level of anxiety, but was able to respond to direction, which the boy wasn't.
He needs to get the injured children out quickly. It will be difficult. The children are trapped in the twisted metal. You're a firefighter. What tool should you use to free the children? A Halligan bar. It can snap open the door quickly. A hydraulic spreader. It's got the muscle to rip metal apart. A reciprocating saw. It's perfect for a precision cut. This is a tight space. A Halligan bar needs room to create leverage, and a reciprocating saw's metal teeth may produce a spark and ignite leaking gasoline. But a hydraulic spreader, also known as the Hearst tool or Jaws of Life, is safe and has the strength to tear the metal apart.
The advantage to the Hearst tool is it's pneumatic, that in the environment we were in, there were gas tanks that had ruptured, there were people working close to each other. You don't really want to be generating heat, sparks.
Firefighters can use the Hearst tool and cut through the car's back door. They pull the young girl from the wreckage, but her brother is still trapped. His leg is caught between the seats and pinned under the dashboard.
Everything had been compressed to about 5 inches tall, including the engine block. I couldn't believe that this thing had compressed a cast iron motor, but just everything was crushed.
Lieutenant Hoffman is afraid the boy will die before they can free him.
I ordered a chainsaw to be brought up with the intention of possibly cutting this kid's leg off if he started to code on me or started to pass away.
Next, to save a young boy's life, rescue workers face a tough decision.
We couldn't do anything with the boy until we could get his leg.
Tuesday, October 17th, 1989. In the worst disaster of the Loma Prieta earthquake, the double-decker Cypress Street Freeway has collapsed. In a 4-foot space between the collapsed decks, Lieutenant Mark Hoffman battles to free a young boy from a crushed car.
Well, he was incoherent. He was in a lot of pain.
For more than 4 hours, firefighters cut at the twisted metal. Once enough space is cleared, doctors examine the boy's leg. It's bad news. The boy's foot is still trapped by the dashboard, and his leg is badly damaged. Doctors decide to amputate. It's the only way to save the boy's life.
Incredibly stressful on the individuals, myself included, that were having to do this. And then the fact that you knew that even if you did your best work, the kid's still going to lose his leg.
It is a difficult operation in extreme conditions. Rescue workers are afraid that the boy will go into shock and die. You're a medic. Which symptom indicates that a patient is going into shock? A rapid pulse, unequal pupil size, difficulty swallowing. Difficulty swallowing and unequal pupil size are signs of many medical conditions, but they are not associated with shock. A rapid pulse, however, is a sign that the heart is trying to compensate for the loss of blood to vital organs caused by injury or a drop in blood pressure. It's an important sign that the patient is going into shock.
They had him on a monitor, for his heart rate. They were able to check his respirations. So we then stopped worrying about the fact that, we might lose this boy.
The operation's quickly underway. In about 20 minutes, the boy is eventually free.
Some guys were elated. Other people were just relieved. On a personal level, I was just glad it was over.
There's a gas leak. Let's go. Turn around and go that way. Gas leak.
Back in the Marina District, on the edge of the San Francisco Bay, firefighters Richard Allen and Jerry Shannon are searching for a woman inside a collapsed building. They can hear her call for help, but they can't find her.
It must be horrible to be trapped in a building, first of all, not know if anybody can even hear you. Then they hear you, and you know they're looking for you, but you wonder if they're ever going to find you.
Neighboring buildings burn out of control. Worse yet, there is little or no water to fight the fires. The earthquake has ruptured the auxiliary water supply.
They were sending engine companies as far out as possible to find hydrants that still had water.
Go back over here.
Inside the building, Richard and Jerry have to tunnel their way through a maze of shattered beams and broken pipes. At times, the crawl space is only 18 inches high. To move forward, they cut the unstable beams with chainsaws.
As you were cutting, it kind of held your breath, and then the chunk of wood fell out. The building didn't come down, so you knew you were safe enough to go another 2 or 3 feet forward to the next pipe or the next piece of wood.
Surrounded by tons of debris, Richard smells gas. Then his worst nightmare is realized. The building catches fire.
We knew that they had to start putting water on that to put it out, or we were going to be trapped in a fire building.
With the auxiliary water system knocked out, what's the best way to transport water to the fires? Fireboats. The bay's 250 yards away. Fire engines. They have water on board already. Fire planes. Each payload can deliver huge amounts of water. While fire engines often carry their own water, it won't be sufficient to put out a major fire. And fire planes can drop huge amounts of water, but in an urban area, the force might injure people below. However, fireboats are readily available and have access to an unlimited supply of water.
The fireboat has the capacity to draw the water from below the water line into pumps, and then those pumps can pump the water into hose.
Firefighter Nathan Hardy is a marine engineer on the fireboat Phoenix. He receives a desperate call. Get the Phoenix to the marina immediately.
At that time, the traffic was backed up. There was no way to get a crew back here. So that's when we realized we had to go without a crew, and the 3 of us took the boat.
The fireboat Phoenix cuts through the water. It is a race against time. The approaching low tide threatens to expose a sandbar at the entrance to the marina. If the tide drops any further, the sandbar will block the entrance.
Well, as we approached it, we could actually feel it hit the bottom of the vessel. I turned to the pilot and said, if we get stuck out here in the mud, we're not going to do anybody any good at all.
The Fireboat Phoenix maneuvers slowly over the sandbar. The massive 520 horsepower engines push the boat through. Alongside the dock, the plan is to use the Phoenix as a massive fire hydrant. Hose lines are connected to the boat's manifolds. Individual fire hoses are joined together to make a hose long enough to reach the fire. It's an ingenious plan, but there's a problem. The hose is too heavy for the firefighters to haul to the front line. Next, how will firefighters get the heavy hose to the fires?
I could smell a definite odor of gas in the air, and I could see some panic in some people's eyes.
In the aftermath of the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, the Fireboat Phoenix has arrived at the edge of the Marina District. Firefighters connect an extra-long fire hose to the boat's massive pumps. But there's a problem. There are not enough firefighters to haul the heavy hose to the fires.
The firefighter without water can't do a lot.
The problem is easily overcome. San Francisco residents grab the line and run up the street.
More and more people grabbed hold of it, and it just started to really go up the street in a hurry. It was amazing. I would not have wanted to get tangled up in that hose because it was coming right off the boat like a machine was pulling it.
The pumps on the Fireboat Phoenix kick in. The 12-valve engines build up about 170 pounds of pressure, and the hose lines fill with water. On Beach Street, a cloud of white steam rises as the salt water hits the flames. But for firefighters Richard Allen and Jerry Shannon, deep inside the remains of a collapsed building, the water can be as deadly as the flames.
Every time you dump water on a building, you add weight to that building, and that increased our concern of collapse. Even if it dropped a foot, it would have been enough to pin us.
Firefighters find a delicate balance. They hit the flames with small amounts of water by using a special nozzle that creates mist. The water turns to steam and draws heat from the fire. As soon as the flames die down, the hose is shut off, and the firefighters wait for the next flare-up.
Had they just put water in unlimited quantities in that building, they almost certainly would have collapsed the rest of that building in on us.
The technique buys Richard and Jerry enough time to find the victim, pinned beneath her bedroom closet door.
Once we had made physical contact with her, able to touch her and hold her hand, there was a great deal of relief. I think she really believed at that point she was going to be saved, that we were going to be successful.
The victim's hip is injured. Unable to move, Richard and Jerry strap her to a stretcher and pull her from the building.
Most of my exhaustion was just emotional exhaustion. It was just to finally be finished with the rescue. Once it's over, then it just all comes in on you, and you realize the magnitude of the operation.
With the building evacuated, the firefighters open the hoses. The Fireboat Phoenix pumps 6,400 gallons of salt water per minute onto the flames.
You could see the white steam, the telltale evidence of water getting on the fire.
60 miles south, the coastal town of Santa Cruz is living its own nightmare.
They just said it shook in San Francisco, all the way from San Francisco all the way down here.
Just 10 miles from the earthquake's epicenter, the city receives the full force of the earthquake.
The force was so strong, you couldn't get out of your chair.
This has got to be the strongest one that has hit Santa Cruz.
Built with unreinforced masonry, 1/3 of the historic downtown buildings rock on their foundations and crumble.
We can see the mortars fall, the bricks roll.
It looked to me like the downtown had died. There was a lot of debris and rubble. The downtown that you always had known no longer existed. It was just gone.
Dan Coiro, photographer for the Santa Cruz Sentinel, is 1 block from Pacific Avenue, downtown's main street, when disaster strikes. He grabs his camera and heads for the destruction.
I just kept going and just walking down the mall, shooting people with dazed looks. I saw a lot of people walking down the street crying. They could not handle it. They didn't know what happened. That was minutes after the earthquake.
Most people flee the destruction.
What floor were you on?
But Dan notices a group running back into the remains of a building. The Ford's department store is little more than a pile of wood and plaster. Through the dust and debris, Dan sees people frantically digging for survivors.
Nobody was saying much. They were just digging. All you could hear were the bricks clattering. Not much talking, just people scrambling to get debris out of the way.
Dan photographs the search for 30 desperate minutes. Finally, Edith Dominguez is pulled from the rubble, and Dan captures the moment on camera.
People, move away, please!
Her leg was severely damaged. People just lifted her out of the rubble, brought her out to the street, and they put her in the back seat of a car and drove her to the hospital.
You're in a shopping mall during an earthquake. Where's the best place to find shelter? In a corner. Corners are structurally sound. They tend to fail last. In the central courtyard, out in the open, you'll be safe from collapsing walls. Under an escalator, it'll protect you from falling debris. Courtyards are often covered by large sections of glass. During an earthquake, this could break and fall, causing injury to persons below. The top and bottom of an escalator can be pulled in opposite directions, leading to a dangerous collapse and injuring anyone beneath. However, in a corner, the walls tend to brace and strengthen each other, often creating a safe spot.
You're surrounded with walls that are structural, they're bearing. You have a ridge line probably from the roof over you. So all those structural components combine to make a system that's actually strong.
Meanwhile, back at the Cypress Street freeway, another victim waits for rescue.
I'm driving along and I feel like I have 4 flat tires, and then boom, something hits from above.
This failure was very, very sudden, but just sliced through the connection between the upper and lower deck. And it just slid outwards and then downwards, so the upper deck collapsed onto the lower deck. So it's very, very scary.
Tim Peterson's trapped between the sandwich decks. He's in terrible pain. Both feet are pinned behind the brake and accelerator pedals. The steering wheel's pressing down on his thighs, and he's having trouble breathing.
I could hear other people screaming, and the horns, all the other cars were packed down. The horns had activated with the steering wheels.
I don't know how the hell we're going to get him out, okay? We have one woman who's unconscious, bleeding from the head. She is breathing, she's got a pulse.
People would poke their head in, and then they would leave, because nobody wanted to be near it. So because the fear was it was going to fall again, and I guess there were aftershocks, and so it was still moving.
Firefighters Victor Cuevas and Andy Pack are the first to climb between the decks. Tim's car is the closest to them.
It was probably crushed down to maybe about 27 inches. I mean, if you can imagine stepping on a soda can, that's how these cars were completely crushed.
Worse yet, the top deck continues to settle.
When we first got there, the highway patrolman had a tape measure, and he had indicated to us that during the time he's been there, the freeway had come down 2.5, 3 inches.
Rescue workers try to shore up the freeway with heavy timbers, but the wood cracks under the weight of 600 tons of concrete and steel.
You hear the wood start to splinter because the weight of the freeway, and you're realizing that you have to hurry up, and it's going to come down to a certain point.
We're still getting a series of aftershocks. Here comes another one. Oh my God.
Aftershocks rattle the freeway. A big one could collapse the structure completely. Battalion commanders face a tough decision. Should they pull and order rescue workers out, or risk losing more lives by letting them remain? They call in engineers to assess the stability of the damaged structure. You're an engineer. What's the most important feature to inspect before you let rescue workers enter a building? Cracks. They show there's damage throughout the entire building caused by uneven movement. Sags. The overhead beams are bending or broken. The building could collapse from above. Bows. The bricks have moved out from the wall. The wall could give way at any moment. Cracks and bows are important signs that serious structural damage has been done to the building. However, it is unlikely that the building will collapse unless more weight is added or there is an aftershock. Sags, however, indicate that main support beams are dangerously compromised. The whole structure could come crashing down.
Probably the most important thing is a sag or a lean in the building. And what that tells us is that some of the interior structural members are beginning to fail.
Engineers cannot guarantee the safety of rescue workers.
Even the officer that was in charge of Vic and Andy's safety basically said, hey, if you guys can't do anything with him, just leave him.
He was so anxious to get out that he wanted us to cut his legs off just to get him out.
Next, the top deck continues to drop. It may be impossible to free Tim from the wreckage.
We started tearing the stuffing and the springs out of the seat so that it can give him a little bit more room.
Between the decks of the collapsed Cypress Street Freeway, firefighters are in a life-and-death struggle to free motorist Tim Peterson from his crushed vehicle.
The steering wheel was pressed against his thighs, causing a lot of pain and also trapping him.
The gap between the decks continues to narrow. The rescue may have to be abandoned.
They had measured it and they had tried to shore it up, and they had realized that it was getting smaller.
The Jaws of Life, or Hearst tool, will speed things up, but crews are using them elsewhere on the structure. Rather than give up, the rescue team tackles the wreck with hand tools.
Andy was able to cut the steering wheel completely off so that he can have a little bit more room. After prying and pulling on the metal and just trying to move things apart, we used jacks to try to stretch the metal to try to get him out.
Finally, a fire truck from the neighboring city of Fremont arrives. They have the Jaws of Life.
We were able to make a couple of cuts and a couple of pries here, and we were able to make enough room just to squeeze them out.
Tim is rushed to the hospital.
When we finally got him out, it was a sigh of relief for everybody. We were able to do our job, and we were able to get him out in one piece, and he was going to survive.
42 motorists die in the collapsed Cypress Street freeway. It's a tragic reminder that in earthquake country, even the most impressive structures can fail. Just 2 miles away, the towering San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge suffers a similar fate. Abby Melamed is on the bridge when the earthquake hits.
My car began to shake. I mean, it was more than a little vibration. It was a shake, and it was rocking side to side.
Ahead of her, Abby sees brake lights. 5 lanes of traffic come to a complete stop.
All of a sudden, we saw all these people running toward us, screaming, "Get off the bridge, get off the bridge, get off the bridge."
Opened for traffic in 1936, the San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge was the longest suspended deck bridge in the world. Hailed as an engineering masterpiece, it appeared indestructible. But now, 53 years later, it's no match for the Loma Prieta earthquake. A 50-foot section on the upper deck slams into the road below.
Truss structure in the middle, which is very, very stiff, and things that are stiff tend to attract more load, more force, and so what happened was that the deck structure actually broke away from this support, and then it pulled the next deck along with it, and then it fell off its support at its other end.
Caught 191 feet above the San Francisco Bay, Abby grows frantic. Ahead, the bridge has collapsed, and aftershocks rumble through the structure. You're caught on the San Francisco Bay Bridge during an earthquake. What should you do? Stay put. The panicking crowds could injure you. Drive away. Get off the bridge as fast as possible. Abandon your car. You will be able to avoid major obstacles. Staying put in your car may make you feel safe, but aftershocks could cause the bridge to collapse. Driving away may seem like a good idea, but abandoned or crashed cars may block your escape. In this situation, your best bet is to abandon your car.
What's going through my mind is, should I lock my car? Should I leave the keys in the car? What if the car needs to be moved? What if someone steals the car? I mean, totally irrational thoughts. The only way to escape or get off the bridge was obviously to run, walk, or crawl.
911 emergency.
Yes, have you gotten word about the Bay Bridge?
Abby decides to run for it.
The upper deck appears to have collapsed during an earthquake.
Hold on a second.
I tried to keep as cool as I could because I figured I would be able to figure out where to go and how to get off the bridge quickly if I sort of kept my wits about me.
Abby and the other motorists head for Yerba Buena Island, a small island in the San Francisco Bay, where the east and west spans of the Bay Bridge meet.
I imagine some people would have felt as if they were trapped on the island, unable to get off, but frankly, I felt very safe. I figured, you know, if it took days, a boat would come by if the bridge in fact was down.
After a few hours, Abby Melamed's allowed back to her car and redirected off the bridge. Meanwhile, in the coastal town of Santa Cruz, residents continue to search for survivors in the ruins of the historic downtown.
When we looked to the downtown area, Pacific Avenue area, we saw these, what turned out to be large dust columns rising from the areas where the unreinforced masonry buildings had collapsed.
Masonry buildings aren't very good in earthquakes because they're very brittle structures. And you might imagine that actually brick is quite strong. But the thing is, the actual mortar in between that is very weak, so it tends to fail along the mortar lines.
Firefighter Matt McCaslin arrives outside a collapsed coffee shop. He hears people are trapped inside. Matt enters the shattered building.
We're going into a building and we know it that everybody's just run out of, and that sets the tone.
Next, firefighters face death and injury when aftershocks hit the unstable building. In the devastation following the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, firefighter Matt McCaslin searches for survivors in the remains of a Santa Cruz building.
The air was acrid with dust, and the smell from the broken and crumbled pieces of masonry, and the light was very dim.
As Matt makes his way to the second floor, a powerful aftershock hits the building. The unstable structure rocks and shifts. Matt has seconds to get his team to safety.
The place that I could find for us was actually next to a pillar column that was bolted to a main beam that supported the overhead. The debris that did fall was deflected away.
Matt's training and quick thinking saves his crew. For several days, Matt and rescue crews continue to search while families wait outside.
A third body has been recovered from the ball. The second body in the coffee roasting company. It is the body of 22-year-old Robin Ortiz.
I would say mixed emotions. Some sadness, but yet some relief that, you know, we'd found them and that we could have some closure.
Come on, man. Come on.
Changed the city drastically. For months and months and months, we were still trying to dig ourselves out of the rubble.
The 7.1 magnitude Loma Prieta earthquake is the largest earthquake to hit California in 83 years. 63 people are dead. Nearly 4,000 injured. The aftermath comes with a hefty $5.9 billion price tag.
We all like to think we're in control, and that's one of the moments you realize is that the gods are in control and you're not.
As the dust settles, the questions begin. What brought the Marina District to its knees? Why did the Cypress Street freeway collapse? Scientists and engineers turn to an obvious culprit, the soft and wet bay soil. When this type of soil shakes during an earthquake, its particles move closer together and force the surrounding water out. This makes the ground liquefy, causing buildings to sink. It's a process called liquefaction.
So basically you get this strong shaking, which is what causes the soil to then soften. And as the soil softens, then you have a large motion back and forth. You can imagine waves in a bathtub moving back and forth. It would be the same type of motion.
Maps created by the United States Geological Survey show vast areas along the margins of the San Francisco Bay are built on soft bay mud. Even more disturbing, California is heading for another major earthquake.
We know the plates are still moving and that the San Andreas Fault is building up stress for another large earthquake.
Californians are doing more than just bracing themselves. They are designing buildings to withstand the awesome power of earthquakes.
With the technology developments we've had over the last 10, 15 years, we have now reached a point where we can design any building or any bridge to be able to withstand the strongest possible earthquake that could happen in California and not be damaged.
What's the best floor plan for a house in an earthquake area? Square. Symmetrical buildings have the greatest structural strength. Cross. Corners are the strongest point in a building. The more corners, the stronger the building. L. The long axis provides stability for the entire building. In complex L and cross-shaped buildings, the force of the earthquake is concentrated at the inside corners. If they fail, the building will collapse. Shake a square-shaped building, and the forces are evenly distributed. There is less chance of damage.
As the earthquake comes, the stiffness is not the same, and so the structures can move in ways which creates great stress in the structure. But a square foundation or a rectangular foundation has stiffness which is equal in all directions, and it moves more as a unit and not as much in torsion, which rips a building apart.
Scientists predict the next big earthquake along the San Andreas Fault will be a magnitude 7 or higher. To face that kind of power, Californians have turned to performance-based design.
Performance-based design is actually looking at different levels of performance for a structure. So for example, a standard code approach would be to design for life safety, which is obviously very important. But nowadays, owners are interested in business continuity. And for things like hospitals and power plants, they obviously want to be operational after an earthquake.
Victor Zayas of Earthquake Protection Systems is the inventor of the friction pendulum bearing, a shock absorber for buildings. It works by isolating the building from the ground, allowing it to rock during an earthquake without breaking up.
We have this concave spherical bowl, and by supporting the weight of the structure on this slider that sits in the middle of the bowl, during an earthquake, instead of the structure being shaken violently, what happens is it goes through a gentle swaying motion where it moves from side to side and it's lifted up rather gently. In this way, we can somewhat harmlessly dissipate the motions of an earthquake without damaging the building.
But out on the San Francisco Bay, designers of the new San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge have come up with a different solution. They've designed the bridge to intentionally fail at key locations.
So we know that if there's going to be a seismic event, there is going to be damage. And so rather than to let the damage occur wherever it wants to, the engineers have gone in and designed this bridge to have failure in certain locations that are easily accessible. You can get to them, and you can make the repairs and get the bridge back underway.
The key to the system is the hinge pipe beam.
In the background, you'll see two large holes in the end of that bridge, and those holes are to accept the hinge pipe beam. The hinge pipe beam is made up of 8 separate cans welded together, and in the middle there's one can that is weaker than all the other ones. And at that location, when the stresses in the ground movement move so much, it's going to fail right at that location. That's where we want it to fail.
By bending and buckling, the hinge pipe beam absorbs the earthquake's energy and protects the rest of the structure and anyone on it. After an earthquake, repairs are easy. Service engineers access the broken segment through utility corridors in the structure and replace the damaged section. The result? The bridge remains intact and in service.
I think this is probably one of the best designed bridges in the world. It's very safe.
With innovations in building designs and construction, Californians are preparing for the next great earthquake. But for those who survived the 1989 earthquake, it is the courage of the individuals that is remembered.
It was taking a unique person to want to crawl down in there and be a part of getting this person out. It took those type of guys to finally do that. That's why they're the heroes.
Tim Peterson was pulled from the horror of the Cypress Freeway with 2 broken ankles, a broken back, shoulder, and ribs. Today, he's an Oakland firefighter, working alongside Victor Cuevas, the hero who rescued him.
You know, I figured it was over. So, and now these are all bonus days for me.
There's a gas leak. Let's go. Turn around.
He's up on this bridge somewhere.
The Loma Prieta earthquake was a day that changed many lives. It was a day where ordinary citizens performed extraordinary deeds.
I saw a man there in a business suit and another one in shorts and sandals. It was quite a cooperative effort there from everyone.
I saw a whole bunch of civilians who, with no training and no experience in there, got up there and tried to help. That's heroism to me.
Living with earthquakes will always be unpredictable and often deadly. We can study, monitor, and learn. We can even build to protect. But when the earth shakes and the ground rolls, those who face nature's power will have to make life or death decisions, choices that will forever change their lives. It's a monster twister.
This is a major tornado.
Oh my God.
It's going to level most houses.
We could see something straight above us, something as large as a car.
How do you track it?
Next thing I know, the power goes off, and then we hear like a freight train,
Where do you hide?
Wow. We're gonna have to retreat, Gary.
Okay.
We've got large chunks of debris falling on us.
And who do you call?
Just unexplainable. The things that happen there is totally unnatural.
Test your knowledge, strategy, and instincts in the face of the Oklahoma City mega tornado.
This thing is massive.
When nature strikes. May 3rd, 1999, Oklahoma City. It's the end of the school year, a typical May morning, warm, humid, and breezy. The sky provides few clues that a storm is brewing. But it's springtime in Tornado Alley, a twister breeding ground that stretches from Texas to Nebraska.
We're just an area where all the ingredients that you need for severe thunderstorms and tornado come together.
By mid-afternoon, heavy storm clouds begin to gather overhead. For many, it appears to be another passing thunderstorm. But for meteorologist Gary England, it could be the first sign that something more ominous is looming on the horizon.
I walked outside and looked at the sky, and it was chaotic. Conditions are pretty favorable for some explosive thunderstorm development. In fact, some of that's going on right now.
Gary checks Doppler radar.
So, storm in the El Reno, Yukon area moving northeast toward Piedmont.
Doppler records wind speeds and identifies areas of tornado potential within thunderstorms. What he sees confirms his worst fears.
Fairly dangerous. Storms are intensifying very rapidly. Suddenly, it's just like the atmosphere is almost turning over. Thunderstorms are just going up everywhere, and they're all rotating.
Perfect conditions for tornadoes. During the spring and summer months, when cold air from the west clashes with warm, moist air from the east, thunderstorms are always a possibility. The most violent ones are known as supercells, intense thunderstorms that rotate. Water droplets from the moist air form a swirling funnel cloud, but it's not until that funnel touches the ground that it's classified as a tornado. You're a meteorologist. What's the best way to verify a tornado touchdown? Doppler radar. Get your team to check for rain density and speed. Tornado-seeking rocket. Have an engineer launch one of these fuel-powered rockets into the storm. Storm chasers. Send a professional crew to the storm to watch for funnel clouds. While Doppler is helpful in showing wind speeds, it won't necessarily reveal if a storm has touched down. A tornado-seeking rocket, although it can measure the temperature, pressure, and humidity inside a tornado, can't determine whether or not a tornado has touched down. The best way to determine if a tornado is forming is an eyewitness. Send out professional storm chasers.
To identify if there's a tornado on the ground, you need someone there to see it, and preferably an experienced person that knows severe storm structure and storm behavior.
Throughout the afternoon, Gary keeps in constant contact with Val and Amy Castor, News 9's husband and wife storm tracker team. Their truck is outfitted with GPS, video cameras, and mobile internet. Gary depends on their eyewitness reports.
Gary, we have a tornado on the ground, a brief touchdown.
And then it happens. Late afternoon, Val and Amy see a small tornado touch down in Lawton, Oklahoma, about 80 miles southwest of Oklahoma City.
The storm kept getting stronger, you know. I mean, I was amazed at how this thing just kept getting stronger and stronger and stronger.
Just 10 minutes later, the storm puts down another tornado. This one is also small, but it's much more powerful, and it's unpredictable.
It was on the ground for probably 15 minutes or so. It wasn't very wide. You know, at times we probably noticed it was maybe 150 yards wide or so, but it was very intense. Oh, I was on the phone with Gary the whole time, and I was saying, Gary, it might not be that big, but it's very intense. I mean, it was just tearing things up.
Wow. This thing is throwing up debris all over the place.
The tornadoes looked more vicious as the day went on, but I can remember thinking, you know, at the beginning of the day, you know, how it started out as just, you know, a small ropey tornado, and each tornado just got larger and larger.
Oh,
wow. Getting on a shear with this storm.
Matt Biddle, a student from the University of Oklahoma, is also on the hunt for tornadoes. He's driving a mobile Mesonet car for the National Severe Storms Lab, a virtual weather station on wheels.
I think about halfway through the chase, it became obvious to even veteran chasers that this was a different kind of day, a 100-year event kind of thing.
Oh my God, this is gonna do it big time.
So I can remember never letting go of the steering wheel for another 6 hours and 14 tornadoes later. It really went fast once it went.
It's a terrifying phenomenon weather scientists call an outbreak, an angry cluster of many tornadoes caused by the same storm system.
Suddenly we were starting to see tornadoes everywhere.
During the next couple of hours, tornadoes begin their assault as they drop from the sky, each one unpredictable, and each one potentially catastrophic.
The May 3rd, 99 tornado at one time was every type of tornado you can imagine. It started out as a small funnel, what we might call an F1, F2 tornado, just a funnel hanging down. At times it was a wedge, times it was a stovepipe, other times it was just a massive, massive tornado on the ground. So any type of description of a tornado that you can come up with, the F5 tornado of May 3rd, at one time or another, could have been identified as one of those, because it was.
This is the kind of day its chasers get killed. It is 23 too late.
While Matt and his team frantically communicate with the Severe Storms Lab, Val and Amy risk their lives to get as close as possible to these twisters.
Gary, this thing has a very intense circulation right at the ground level. It's not very big around, but I wouldn't want to be in the path of it.
I was telling him where it was and which way it was going and what it looked like. And what I was trying to get across to him is even though it was a relatively narrow tornado, it was very strong.
Strong enough to produce a deadly F5. Devised in 1971 by Dr. Ted Fujita of the University of Chicago, the F scale, for Fujita, classifies tornadoes into differing intensities based on their damage to man-made structures. It runs from 0 to 6. While an F0 produces estimated winds of 40 to 72 miles per hour, F5s can produce ruthless winds of up to 318 miles per hour. F6 tornadoes are considered inconceivable. Even though the F scale is widely used, F scale wind speeds have never been scientifically tested and proven.
An F5 tornado tears up everything in its path, and believe me, I've seen it. An F5 tornado, generally speaking, if you don't have underground shelter, you're going to be injured, if not killed, when the tornado comes through. I mean, it's that deadly.
And now, weather with Gary England.
Okay. All right, storms continue to
Back at News 9, Gary England anxiously watches Doppler. He tells Val and Amy that the already massive supercell thunderstorm is growing. And that means the next tornado that touches down could be catastrophic.
When I turned and looked at it, it was huge. And I had never seen rotation in a wall cloud like that before. I mean, it started huge. You know, when it first touched down, I said, Gary, this is a large tornado.
Not only is it a giant, but there's a significant satellite tornado attached to it. That equals double the deadly power. These smaller but strong twisters, also known as subvortices, hide inside many big twisters, but dust and debris usually keep them out of sight. This one is visible, and it's terrifying. In the newsroom, Gary England is listening to Val Castor with disbelief.
Gary, we can see another funnel, actually.
Where's it?
Hey, we've got another funnel behind the first one. It's on the ground. There's two tornadoes on the ground right now.
The adrenaline level goes up. This satellite tornado was the size of most normal tornadoes, and you had this monster in the middle.
Two tornadoes on the ground.
Subvortices can form and die within a few seconds. These small tornadoes may be short-lived, but they can wreak havoc inside the main tornado. The wind speeds can increase by over 100 miles per hour. As a result, subvortices are the main cause of most of the narrow, extreme swaths of damage that sometimes appear in tornado tracks.
Oh, and that is getting bigger. The main one is getting bigger, too, much bigger.
Just when they think it can't get any worse, the violent tornado grows.
This thing is massive.
The storm started to go from being sort of spectacular and I would call maybe sort of textbook to this sort of monster kind of entity that seemed to be almost alive.
The tornado moves northeast toward the town of Chickasha, 42 miles southwest of Oklahoma City. As it moves, this already massive tornado does something astounding. It keeps growing.
But it's big, very big.
Val was making comments like, you know, it's going to get bigger. It's going to be a big one. And you know, an average person saying that to you wouldn't pay any attention, but if Val Castor's saying it to you, you pay attention because the guy knows what he's talking about. We have a very significant, possibly deadly tornado on the ground.
In the field, Val and Amy Castor come face to face with the full force of this monster.
There was a point there to which we got kind of too close, and we looked at each other and said, man, this is big.
So close, they can hear it.
The one on May 3rd was absolutely the scariest sound I've ever heard. If you can imagine a deep roar, kind of like a B-52, like the engines of a B-52, it kind of got to you. You know, I mean, it was a deafening roar. The closer you got, the louder it got, but it was definitely something that I'll never forget.
There's all kinds of debris flying through the air, all kinds of debris. Yeah, look here. Look. We're gonna have to retreat, Gary.
Okay.
We're gonna have to back up here. We've got large chunks of debris falling on us.
We both looked up in the sky and out the windshield of the truck, we almost had to look straight up. And we could see something, a large piece of debris, straight above us. You know, maybe, I don't know, 3/4 of a mile above us in the air. Something as large as a car.
A tornado is closing in on your car. Which direction should you drive? Toward an overpass, the structure will protect you from the wind. Drive around it. It will be calm on the other side. Drive at a right angle. This will take you out of the tornado's path. Hiding under an overpass is one of the most dangerous things to do. They act as a funnel for debris. Although some renegade storm chasers try to skirt around a tornado, it's extremely dangerous. Under these extreme circumstances, drive at a right angle, out of the tornado's path. Most tornadoes move around 30 miles per hour.
There's no reason why you could not safely and orderly fashion drive away from a tornado. And that would be the thing that you would want to do.
When we looked up out the windshield and saw a huge car or a roof or something overhead, you know, we just turned around and drove away from it. You know, we probably drove a half a mile and turned around and watched it till we thought we were safe.
It hasn't even hit highly populated areas, but already the damage is tragic. The tornado rips through farmhouses, tearing them apart.
Gary, this is the stuff F-Force made us.
I was trying my best just to tell Gary, look, it's big and it's bad, and it's the biggest one I've ever seen.
I've seen wider tornadoes, I've seen taller tornadoes, but I don't think I've ever seen a more frightening tornado.
When it was near Chickasha is when I think Val really realized how bad it was going to be, and I realized how bad it was going to be. And it moved north of Chickasha and put down this huge tornado. I remember at one point Val said, Gary, it's so large I can't get it in my viewfinder.
Gary's live broadcast warns the residents of Chickasha that the killer tornado might come their way.
This is the most incredible thing I've seen.
It's large, it's huge.
6:20 p.m. The tornado roars through Chickasha, Oklahoma. Amazingly, it spares the center of town. It appears this wind-driven twister has a bigger target in mind, the state capitol. Coming up, the monster tornado is still growing, and it's headed toward Oklahoma City.
It's getting ready to move into a very densely populated area. This is a huge, deadly tornado, wedge tornado. Now it's coming down again. It's coming down.
A massive tornado has touched down, and now it's headed on a dangerous path toward Oklahoma City. Early evening, News 9 storm trackers Val and Amy Castor risk their lives to give Gary England a critical blow-by-blow report.
Gary, you there?
Yes.
Okay, Gary, man, this thing is still just as large as it ever was.
F6.
Suddenly, the tornado shocks everyone. According to Val and Amy's GPS, it shifts direction and moves straight toward a densely populated area.
On our map, we're starting to see areas of residential sections in its path now, more towards the northeast. I mean, it's starting to come into the outskirts of the metro area.
There is nothing that can stop this catastrophic tornado. It's already ripped through farmhouses, but now, something more valuable may be at stake: human lives.
When I started seeing that grid section of roads coming into the map view, you know, at that point I started getting cold shudders because I knew that a tornado this large, you know, was going to be doing tremendous amounts of damage. And tornadoes like this is what kill people.
This really was the monster, and it was in a populated area.
Gary urgently warns residents to take cover.
I knew I had to say something different because I've done thousands of warnings, and usually there's not thousands of tornadoes. And so I for the first time ever, I said you need to be below ground level to survive. And I knew that would get their attention.
This is a long track, potentially deadly tornado. It is best if you are below ground level. You know, you can find a basement in a building, a basement in a church, steel reinforced buildings. Mobile homes will not survive this. You need to be below ground. Many regular structures will not survive this.
6:45 p.m. Oklahoma City's then mayor, Kirk Humphreys, is watching News 9's live coverage with horror. He fears the worst. The city could be completely destroyed.
And Gary England came on TV and said, if you are not below ground, get below ground. I had never heard that before.
So this thing is very deadly. This is a wedge tornado. This is the type of tornado that you need to be below ground level.
We all know Gary England real well, and he's famous around here for tornadoes. But I had never heard that sense of urgency in Gary England's voice, and I headed to the storm shelter.
If you're driving anywhere between Chickasha and Oklahoma City on I-44, get off of that sucker now if you got to run through a fence.
At Channel 9, the newsroom erupts into a state of frenzy.
The adrenaline was pumping, but it was like watching a movie, except you're a part of it. Because you're looking, this is happening, here's a helicopter shot, here's Val saying this, and it was a weird feeling.
This thing is a monster.
6:50 p.m. The tornado hits about 25 miles south of Oklahoma City, in the town of Bridge Creek.
The power lines begin to flash, and it's obvious, you know, we're watching it live, it's going through populated areas, and people had to be dying. There's just no other way, because not everyone gets the message. And the power line flash was just kind of pow, 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 pow.
As you watch this, keep in mind,
Gary's worst fears begin to materialize.
Hey, Merry Christmas.
Moore, Oklahoma, just south of Oklahoma City. It's dinner time at local residents Charlotte and John Holleran's house. They have no idea that one of the worst tornadoes to hit the area is less than 20 miles away.
I was in the kitchen making sloppy joes, and I do remember Gary England coming on, and I remember the seriousness in his voice.
What began as an average night quickly turns into a series of life and death decisions. Their first move, immediately alert the neighbors.
I convinced my neighbors, I said, guys, we need to get out of here. And it was basically a caravan of 4 families. We loaded up kids, the hamsters, the dogs, and we got in the car and left our addition.
There's lots of debris in the air.
As the tornado moves into the Oklahoma City metro area, it's critical for Gary to reach as many people as possible. But suddenly, his broadcast is interrupted.
As the tornado went through the power lines, it would cut off the power for sometimes just a matter of seconds. But you know, when you cut off the power in a building like this, because all we do is use power, there's this loud wham.
Stay right.
Remind people we're on KXY.
We're on KXY radio. We're on KXY radio. This tornado is.
And we'd go off the air, and you know, it was almost like a shot faced every time it happened. Everybody just went like this, and then we'd get back on the air, and then the tornado would go through another one of those major trunk lines, and it'd just be bam.
7:15 p.m. The tornado violently churns through the Oklahoma City suburb of Moore. It tears up house after house. Charlotte and John Holleran are watching the news coverage on a portable TV in their car. What they see is heart-wrenching.
They were following the path of destruction, and I just went, there's my addition. And I think that was a defining moment, the fact that you're looking at cul-de-sac after cul-de-sac that's gone.
This is absolutely incredible. Okay, this is a damaged path across parts, I don't know what it's Moore.
3 miles from the Hollerens house, on the border of Moore and Oklahoma City, an awards ceremony is in progress at Westmore High. Approximately 600 students and family members are inside the school. It's too dangerous to evacuate. They need to find the safest place to hide. Then teacher Roy Smith is there with his family.
As men are known to do, especially in Oklahoma, we were standing outside watching the tornado. We stayed out there watching until not the row of houses immediately south of the high school, but the next block over, we saw them start to explode and could see debris going up in the air from those, and of course the tornado was here. And so we ran in the building and took shelter.
Meanwhile, Craig Hitchcock drives home from work. He hasn't heard the storm reports. Instead, he discovers it firsthand.
By the time I got to South Oklahoma City, I had golf ball size hail hitting, kind of pounding the car. I could see how black and dark it was really getting toward the west of Moore. And as I got a little closer, I stopped, and it was a solid black wall.
He nervously turns on the radio in his car.
I remember when Gary England gave a report about the tornado.
Airport, huge tornado on the ground that will be passing.
He said, you know what? Don't even stay in your house. Get below ground, because this one, you won't survive. And that was scary. I mean, when you hear something like that, you know it's going to be really bad.
You have time to take shelter. That means below ground shelter.
A few miles north of Moore, local resident Shelley Warlick is listening to Gary England's warnings. Shelley is 9 months pregnant and terrified.
He was saying, take cover, this is really bad, it's really big, and if you can be underground, be underground.
I knew by that point what it was and what it could do to people. And all you could do was talk about it and stress that they get out of the way.
The Warlicks don't have time to get out of harm's way, and they don't have a storm cellar. Still, they must find a way to save their own lives.
Yeah, okay. Just very briefly.
If you don't have a basement, where's the best place to go in your home? A bathroom. The plumbing provides structural reinforcement. An interior hallway. The more central you are in a house, the safer you are. Or a bedroom. Hiding beneath the bed will protect you from falling debris. Bedrooms and bathrooms usually have windows. Debris can come crashing through them or through the outside walls. Getting in the bathtub is a good second choice, but the best choice is in a hallway in the center of the house on the lowest level. It's the most structurally sound location, and since most hallways don't have windows, you'll be further protected from the flying glass and debris.
We went ahead and got the two girls in the closet.
Shelley and her mother-in-law take cover in the hallway.
Next thing I know, the power goes off.
Coming up, the tornado rips through Westmore High, where hundreds of terrified people are taking shelter.
Oh boy, oh boy, this is not good.
May 3rd, 1999. An F5 tornado is minutes from the southwestern edge of Oklahoma City. At Westmore High, roughly 600 people are attending an awards ceremony. Teacher Roy Smith is about to experience the force of an F5. 7:20 p.m. The tornado hits Westmore High with a vengeance. Roy and his family huddle in an office. Debris smashes against the building.
If you stuck your head in a popcorn popper, if you could imagine what that would sound like, how violent, how fast, how loud that would sound, because there was just debris hitting the side of the building just at amazing rates of speed, and the amount of debris.
Within minutes, the tornado chews through the school. It leaves massive piles of debris in its wake.
The light fixture fell down out of the ceiling, was just hanging by the electrical wires. This is the area where the ceiling peeled off over our heads, and as the tornado passed through, you could just look up and see the sky.
It's huge.
That's been at about a quarter of a mile right now. Yeah, we need to move.
The twister is unstoppable.
And it looks like it's a huge cloud on the ground. It's just a giant tornado.
To save lives, Gary needs to know where it's headed next. What's the best way to track the path of a tornado? With a helicopter, it'll give an eyewitness aerial view. Using radar, it'll show the debris cloud. By satellite, it'll reveal the supercell thunderstorm formation. While satellite imagery will reveal the formation of a supercell, it won't show an actual tornado. A helicopter can see the tornado from a distance, but it becomes dangerous if it gets too close. The best way to track a tornado is Doppler, because the debris cloud, the rubble swirling around the tornado, will show up on radar.
On May 3rd, the debris cloud was so huge it showed up on radar, and essentially you could track it quite well.
It's very broad, and this is not the exact speed, but right now it's moving Del City, Tinker, Moore, huge tornado, deadly tornado, back to Ranger 9.
Doppler shows that the giant twister is now headed toward the Oklahoma suburb of Del City. Pregnant Shelley Warlick and her family have no way of knowing whether they'll all survive.
Next thing you hear is these like big things hitting the house and the wood splintering and just everything just coming down and swirling around you.
By 8 p.m., the tornado passes through the Oklahoma City metro area, leaving a trail of death and destruction. As the sun goes down, other twisters wreak havoc in the dark.
God. Man, we've got debris everywhere.
Man.
Everything is leveled out here.
The tornado that 10 west-southwest of Shawnee.
Those storms went on well into the nighttime hours, even after midnight. I mean, so we probably didn't get through chasing that night until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning.
It was a very emotional roller coaster ride.
Tornadoes often die off when cool air on the storm's backside wraps around and cuts off the warm, humid air flowing in. At News 9, Gary England sees footage of the damage path. It's catastrophic.
As you folks watch this thing now, as you watch this, keep in mind,
Residents frantically search for their loved ones.
She's dead in the bathtub. My sister.
They said nobody's been over there. They got some injured people next street over.
Local resident Craig Hitchcock makes it home. His house survived the tornado. He grabs his daughter and drives back to the damage path to help.
Who had just been through EMT basic training and said we'd better go back up there and see what we can do to help. And so we got some tools and things, and we headed back to Moore. Didn't look bad at first approaching Moore, but as we went over the overpass, it was incredible. There were beds in the highway. There was debris fields, 4 foot tall along each side of the highway guardrail. Saw dressers sitting out there complete with drawers in them, sitting in the middle of the highway. And it was just incredible. But as we came in, so I said, oh, this is going to be bad.
Mayor Humphreys is one of the lucky ones. The tornado spares his house. He immediately starts working the phones.
Our first concern was to preserve human life. Let's get people out of there. Let's get them safe. Let's find out if there are people that are buried or need help.
As the mayor, who's the first person you should call to get the rescue operation underway? The fire captain. He's in charge of rescue missions. The police chief. He will maintain order. The city manager. He can coordinate the operation. The police and fire departments play an important role in rescue operations, but most cities count on, first and foremost, a central point person, a city manager, to coordinate and prioritize all operations.
In our system, the police chief and the fire chief and the public works director all work for the city manager, and the city manager reports to the mayor and council. So my first contact with the city manager.
The city manager dispatches the fire department to the scene, but there's so much debris on the roads, they can't drive into the neighborhoods to begin their search.
But we weren't prepared for all the debris. Most of the fire trucks were on flats because of all the debris, the nails and the lumber in the streets, and for the most part, they didn't make it to the scene.
They are forced to climb in on foot. It's a grueling task.
You know, I've been in Oklahoma City all my life, and there's tornadoes every year. And, you know, it's something that, a little tornado hit, and we get over it. You know, we rebuild and regroup, get our lives back together. But this was the worst I've ever seen in my entire life. We had no idea that it was going to be that bad.
Then dispatcher Brian Staniland is in charge of the Oklahoma City Fire Department's Emergency Response Center. They receive 911 calls via computer. He's at the epicenter of the community's panic and the nation's fears that loved ones are injured or, even worse, dead.
We started having these check the welfare calls pop up instantaneously. I mean, 10, 20, 30 calls within just a matter of seconds popped up on the screen.
Hello? We have an injury?
It's very difficult in that kind of situation to respond on the individual calls. There were too many coming in at once. I started worrying, you know, how are we going to help all of these people?
You have family living in the disaster zone. What agency do you contact to find out if they are okay? The Red Cross. Call their hotline. A local hospital. Check the patient locator. The Department of Emergency Management. Check to see if they have a list of survivors. Local hospitals may have patient locators, but names will only be on the list if they were admitted. The Department of Emergency Management is in charge of coordinating the actual response and recovery operations, but they don't keep a list of survivors. The best thing to do is contact the Red Cross. They have one of the largest consolidated family links registries available. Across town at Westmore High, Roy Smith and his family are trapped inside a small office. They try to open the door to get out, but 4 feet of debris block it. Finally, they force it open.
We looked over here, realized everything was gone. The houses were all gone, the fence was gone. Ordinarily, when you would look out to the south, all you could see was houses and neighborhood. And it was all gone and flattened to the point where it was just like a flat area you could see all the way down to the intersection.
The high school quickly becomes a top priority. A 911 call comes in that the school is on fire. Battalion Chief Ahmed Rashidi is quickly dispatched to the scene.
When I got there was so much dust and debris in the air, it almost looked as if it was on fire. The roof was just ripped off of it, and there was just so much dirt and grass and debris. It had a glow to it in the background, and it appears as if it was on fire.
Stunned survivors flee the building by the hundreds. It's a surreal scene Gary England will never forget.
When the people filed out of there, you know, it kind of looked like a war zone. They were walking across this field, long line of several hundred people, and, you know, some missing their shoes, but they were all dressed up.
The parking lot is littered with cars, debris, and even livestock.
There was a horse that was in the parking lot that had blown in from somewhere just south of there.
There's a horse farm that is next door to our school to our north, and we just thought it was those animals. We later found out that they actually had come from a farm that was a mile to our west and about a mile and a half south. So those animals were carried probably in a direct path, over a mile.
Coming up, entire neighborhoods are suddenly gone. Yet where are the residents? An F-5 has ripped through Oklahoma, tearing up neighborhood after neighborhood. The damage is so severe that rescue workers can't navigate the debris-covered streets or identify individual homes. Survivors must now struggle to stay alive, trapped under the wreckage of what used to be their homes.
We actually had maps, and we had to go through there and walk door to door, or what used to be doors. A lot of it was just slabs and debris down on the ground, and try to figure out where the actual address was.
Shelley Warlick's entire neighborhood is leveled. Her family manages to get out, but Shelley is stuck under the debris. She's 9 months pregnant and terrified that she might go into labor. The tornado has passed, but you're trapped under rubble. What's the first thing you should do? Try to get out. Push through the debris to free yourself. Signal for help. Use the debris to cause commotion. Stay still. Wait for rescue workers. Trying to get out is not a good idea. Pushing through the debris is dangerous. There may be live wires, glass, or collapsing ceilings. Using the debris to signal for help is just as dangerous. The best thing to do is stay still, yell if you hear activity, and wait for the rescue workers to find you.
From a professional standpoint, my advice would be the best thing to do would be to leave things alone as much as you can. The problem with moving stuff around is you're liable to cause further injury.
I didn't try to move because I know I was 9 months pregnant, and I didn't want, me to try to strain myself.
Shelley's frantic husband locates her and pulls her out. Once she's free, they climb through acres of debris to get out of their neighborhood, then spend the night in another town at her mother's house, which was unharmed by the twister. On the other side of town, Craig Hitchcock and his daughter make their way to a local command center and start searching for wounded victims.
Started crawling through houses, and as I looked around and we hollered for people and stuff, there was paper just spinning like little tornadoes all around the room. And you could feel your hair lift and stuff. It was the atmospheric condition was just all messed up. It would be 80 degrees in one spot, and just 4 feet away it would be like 70, 71. So there's a lot of hot and cold. The conditions were just weird.
Anyone back here?
Back in the Westmore area, Chief Rashidi and his team searched the ruins for survivors.
Cars were overturned, some were blown out in the fields. I saw a school bus there. The seats were ripped out of it. I mean, it's just unexplainable. The things that happen there is totally unnatural. I mean, it's confusing and bewildering.
He discovers a desperate man pinned beneath one of the mangled cars. You're a rescue worker. What's the best tool to remove a victim who's trapped under a car? Bulldozer. The shovel has the strength to lift it. Airbag. A rescue airbag can be slid beneath it and carefully inflated. Rope. They are fast, flexible, and strong. A bulldozer is good for pushing debris, but it's too rough for this delicate task. Using a rope to pull the car up is risky. If the ropes slip, the car could come crashing down. The safest method is to use airbags. By sliding them underneath and inflating them using the fire truck's breathing apparatus, they can lift up to 20 tons.
The airbags are going to lift from the bottom. They're going to give you a good clearance, and then as you're lifting with the airbag, you can shove pieces of wood under there to hold it up.
I removed the guy from underneath an automobile with the bag, with the airbag.
The high school has been evacuated. But across the street, another disaster looms. It's an apartment complex that has been completely leveled.
It looked more like an explosion. There was just a pile of debris where a fairly large apartment complex used to be.
It was basically like being in an explosion. The shrapnel was actually what was causing injuries. It was very horrifying.
One image really stuck in my mind, and that's the lady that had the 2x4 lodged through her neck, and she's being wheeled to the hospital. And at that point, you just think, how could anybody survive this?
And the one thing that most people don't like to discuss, and that is the removal of bodies, you know, the extrication and the storage of bodies. What I had my crews to do was go in the apartments and cut carpet, you know, and then cover the bodies or wrap the bodies up and put them on the side of the chief's car so that the other people couldn't witness, you know, the damage and the destruction. That's probably the worst thing I've seen down there. We can build another building, but you can't replace a human life.
Exhausted search and rescue teams work through the night and into the next day, hoping to find survivors.
Our police and firefighters and public works did a great job of protecting life and protecting property, and then beginning the cleanup process where people could get back in and start putting their lives back together.
Coming up, a shocking discovery. Could this tornado's power actually rival a nuclear blast? On May 3rd, 1999, a monstrous F5 tornado rips through the Oklahoma City metro area and beyond, leaving a grim path of destruction in its deadly wake. Through the night, the Oklahoma City Fire Department searches for survivors, yet many miraculously survive the devastation. 9-month pregnant Shelley Warlick escaped from her collapsed house. She and her family spent the night at her mother's house. Now, on May 4th, she goes back to her property to search for what's left of her old life. All that's left is a pile of debris. Shelley's only able to salvage a few photos, but then, suddenly, the stress of the search forces her into labor.
Around 5, my water broke. I think I was still in shock, probably thinking, you know, oh my gosh, you know, we did lose everything. But I think that took, when me going into labor kind of took that off my shoulders.
At 7 p.m., Shelley gives birth to a healthy baby boy.
It was really weird because I know, you know, I did lose everything, but you know, I still had my family.
A few weeks later, the students at Westmore High are able to finish out the school year at a local community college. The seniors celebrate graduation day.
I think for those seniors, it was extremely important that we did have closure on the year and have a graduation ceremony, and so we were able to do that.
That used to be a row of houses. People had just moved in or possibly hadn't even moved in yet.
Residents begin to organize their shattered lives and move on.
You can see they're already bulldozing.
In any one neighborhood, you're looking at damage that is among the worst you've ever seen, and it goes on and on and on. And that, coupled with seeing aerial photos and even satellite images that show the damage path, is when you really start to understand the scale of the disaster.
There's just streets and streets and streets that look like this.
Approximately 675 people were injured, with nearly 45 deaths. More than 8,000 buildings, 7,000 homes, and 20,000 automobiles are destroyed. The estimated damage exceeds $1.2 billion, one of the most damaging tornadoes in history.
Right here is Chris and Maria's house. You can see not much left.
You know, I've seen lots of tornado damage, but I don't think I've ever seen anything this bad. Matter of fact, I know I haven't seen anything this bad.
It's like they were able to maybe retrieve some things out of drawers. And
There were many homes, hundreds of homes that had to be scraped. And, you know, one of the big roles of the city was helping those folks understand what relief was available to them through FEMA, helping coordinate things with the Corps of Engineers.
here we are at our house.
But rebuilding means considering how they'll survive the next massive tornado. What's the most practical safety feature to add to your home? Anchor bolts. They'll hold the framework to the foundation. Concrete. Reinforced walls will stand up against strong winds. Storm cellar. Underground is the safest place to be. Anchor bolts will help hold a home together, but the roof can still blow off, causing the walls to collapse. Reinforcing a home with concrete will add extra support, but it's extremely expensive. Building a storm cellar into the foundation is the safest and most practical option. It's inexpensive, effective, and easily accessible.
One of the things that we knew we would have in our next home is a storm cellar that we could go into and not have to leave the house.
So this is simply a 4x8 metal, steel constructed cellar that you can walk in. And we've actually had to use it probably about 3 or 4 times since we've been here.
On May 3rd, the Severe Storms Lab launched several Doppler on Wheels units. When the data came back, scientists learned that the Oklahoma City tornado swept through at speeds of up to 318 miles an hour. Equal in force to a shock front nuclear explosion, it was the greatest tornado force ever measured.
I mean, it was incredible. Trees were debarked, grass was stripped out of the ground. There were some places where there was just bare dirt.
It was as if somebody had just scarred the land, just taken a large chunk out of the land.
The damage was obvious, but questions remained. Why were some houses leveled while others next door were untouched? The answer: the tornado was made up of several subvortices.
As it moved through the metropolitan area for a long time, it was a very large column of dirt and debris and you name it, and you couldn't see through it. It's a 1/4 mile wide and you can't see through it, but inside there were individual tornadoes. So you have this column of dirt and debris that you can't see through, and at any one time there were up to 6 tornadoes on the inside of that big one. There's what we call suction vortices, and those are the ones that we think that create the winds of 300, 318 mile an hour. They're much smaller, and they're rotating at an incredible speed.
The winds from one vortex may only be strong enough to do minor damage to a particular house, but one of the others may strike the house next door with higher winds, causing complete destruction. Consequently, in entire neighborhoods that were completely leveled, a few fortunate homes remained.
So you get this path, it's kind of like this. And so they're crossing each other's paths, but you'll hit one house, misses the next one, goes down, so they're weaving in and out. People used to say, what jumped over my house? No, it basically went around it.
And that wasn't all. Data showed that the May 3rd outbreak spawned over 58 tornadoes within 8 storm systems.
Normally in an entire year we have about 52, 53 tornadoes, so we had the entire load in one afternoon, one evening.
The size of the storms, the length of the tracks, the number of tornadoes was epic in many, many ways.
Now you folks in Pocasset, Tuttle, Amber, Mustang have time to move to a place of safety.
In another time, the death toll would have been catastrophic, but due to dedicated meteorologists like Gary England, fearless storm trackers, and courageous search and rescue teams, thousands of lives were saved.
Meteorologists, weather guys on television take a lot of abuse. You know, we're the target of a lot of abuse. But it's great to talk to people that we actually did some good. We actually saved some lives, and so it's been a gratifying experience.
Oh, we listened to you till you went off the air.
Did you?
Yes. They were out there.
Were you right back here? Yeah. You were pretty fortunate then, looks like.
We were all,
we
were all so fortunate. Not one person got killed. Not one.
When I hear stuff like that, it makes it worth it. You know, everything we do out there, us risking our lives to do what we do, it just makes it all worth it to know that we've helped, you know, save somebody's life.
When disasters like this one hit, those involved are faced with life and death decisions. But some things remain constant: the determination, bravery, and spirit of the Oklahoma people.